Guys, thank you for joining this keynote session. I'm personally very excited to have today's keynote speaker with us and participating in this. So it's an absolute pleasure to introduce him. He is an author, a CEO, a podcast guest extraordinaire, and often a very controversial socio-political commentator. But fundamentally, he is an exceptional entrepreneur, and he's here to share his journey. Please welcome to our keynote stage, Bryan Sharpe, aka Hotep Jesus.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you. Good morning. It's 9:45 a.m. over here in the morning. As an entrepreneur, I usually don't wake up till noon, and then I go to bed at like 3 o'clock in the morning. And then do it all over again. So this is a little bit early for me when we're trying to give you guys lots of energy. So in order to start my story, I have to talk about my upbringing and why tech is such a big part of my life. My brother actually moved here from Jamaica. Educational system in Jamaica is, at least where he went to school, was far more advanced than United States students. He came to the United States at the age of 16, I believe, 15 or 16. And he tested out of high school and went straight to college, just because, you know, many foreign countries are just so far ahead in education. But he was a math genius. You know, he's a math genius. He was a tech guy, computer programmer, NJIT graduate. But right around the 80s, you know, I want to say like early 80s, we had a Commodore 64. So, you know, I was born in 1980. And so, you know, pretty much from inception, I've been around computers. And back in those days, when you had a Commodore 64 to play a video game, you practically had to be a programmer to get the thing to start. So, you know, that was my first moment of being exposed to the computer. Fast forward, you know, I used to go with my dad to computer shows. We used to build computers from scratch, pick the motherboard out, so on and so forth, pick the hard drive, you know, so on and so forth. So I was very much involved in and understood the tech behind how computers ran and how to build them. My first real entrepreneurship was a printing business. You know, we had a pretty good printer, we had a pretty good computer. And I used to print business cards for people. This is 1996. Now, in those days, in order to get an internet, they sent you like these little AOL discs. So I had a friend who was a Visual Basic pro, and he used to make these little hack programs. So in order to get on AOL with different aliases, we'd use this hack program that generated fake credit card numbers, names. And you'd get on, and it'd work probably for like 24 hours, and then AOL would find out and they'd ban you. But I used to spend a lot of time just trolling chat rooms, making aliases and just trolling chat rooms. So that was like the beginnings of, I guess you can say, social networking. And then 98, you know, entrepreneurship. I used to do something really silly. After gym class, people would be, you know, sweaty, you know, so on and so forth. So I used to have my collection of cologne in my locker. And I used to charge people to use cologne after after gym class. The point of me saying that is, you know, some people say that, you know, you're either born an entrepreneur or you learn to be an entrepreneur. Personally, I think I was born an entrepreneur. We'll talk about some people I've influenced to who learned to become an entrepreneur. So, you know, fast forward, I wasn't a fan of college too much. You know, I think I was just an intelligent person, but I just never really respected too many of my teachers, especially professors. They used to come to school and they'd have like disheveled cars, right? And I'm just like, why is your car so beat up? But you're a professor, like, shouldn't you like have money? And just started noticing that, you know, just because somebody's teaching a course doesn't mean they actually understand the material. Because I always thought, like, if you teach a business course, you know, why don't you have a business? So on and so forth. So I didn't really appreciate that too much. Then I was selling women's shoes at Nordstrom. That's a very entrepreneurial thing to do. Super fun, great money. You know, at the age of 19, I was making, you know, $1,200 a week or something like that in US. So I was making serious money, you know, for a kid. And then I moved on to the Cheesecake Factory, which is a pretty decent restaurant, really popular here in the States. There, you'd probably make anywhere from $200 to $400 a day, and less hours. But while I was there, I was recruited by a mortgage company. A bunch of guys in suits come in and they place their orders. Everybody's got, you know, different modifications for their order and their food and so on and so forth. And I memorized their entire order and everything came out perfect. And they were like, wow, how'd this guy do this? I just kind of like have this photographic memory. So they were so impressed. They were like, yo, we want you to come work with us. So I go and I go work at this mortgage company. Now I'm wearing a suit. Wasn't too used to that. But during all this time, I had a record label. You know, my friends wanted to be rappers. I wanted to be the record label owner. I was like, you guys can rap. I kind of liked the art of rap. I wanted to learn how to rap, but I didn't want to be the artist. I knew that the guy behind the scenes made more money, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be the owner. So while I'm running this record label, I'm at this mortgage company, and 3 months pass. I hadn't gotten a single check. I'm living with my friend, and he's laughing at me. He's like, you left that good job, and you know, you come to this place. And I'm like, just trust me, bro. Just trust me. So he thought it was like an MLM scam. So then I finally closed my first deal. It was with a bank at the time called Argent. It was a 4.25% ARM loan. And the lady was just really savvy and she talked me down. And my first check was like $400 or something like that. So my friend laughed at me again. Well, a month later, I actually got good at this and I brought home a check for $5,000. And I came home, cashed the check into all notes, and I just threw it on his bed. I said, I told you so. I told you so. So the mortgage business back then was, there was no salary, obviously. There's no hourly wage. You got what you got. You know, you had to go out and you had to hunt. It was, you know, either be a lion or be a sheep. But in those days, we had leads. We had leads that would come through certain companies, some warm leads, some hot leads. But the real good money was in cold calling. So, you know, back in those days, you'd make at least, you'd probably wait till like maybe 5 p.m. and you just start cold calling like straight off of a penny list that the company bought. You know, each sheet was like a penny or something like that. And you just cold call. And what I used to do was something funny was I used to go print out a phone book when I picked everybody with either the first name Bryan or the last name Sharpe so that I had an icebreaker straight away. It didn't really work too well, but I think I did close maybe one Sharpe loan and maybe one Bryan loan. But the icebreaker definitely worked. It just seems that it was just random chance, right, of who was going to actually close. But I knew back in those days, you know, you definitely had to make at least 100 calls. You'd probably, you know, if you got good, you could close something or get somebody to fill out an application in under 50 calls, right? But, you know, if you weren't that good, you'd probably have to make somewhere close to 100 calls. So we'd sit there and we'd manually type in these numbers and bang out these calls. And that was my first or my second, actually third, right? Because you figure my sales background was in food. You make a lot of money from upsells, trying to sell drinks. And then I was selling women's shoes. And then here I am selling mortgages. So I have all this sales background, not to mention my entrepreneurial work in high school, like I told you about. But in the mortgage industry is really where I learned about the science of sales and talking over the phone. And then I'm young, right? So I'm like 20 and I'm speaking to like these adults that are like 40 and 50 and, you know, 35, so on and so forth. So this is a very interesting time for me. And then all my colleagues are older gentlemen. You know, I'm the youngest guy there in the office, but I'm also, because I'm young, I'm computer savvy. You know, anytime a computer breaks down in the office, I'm the one fixing it, or I'm fixing the printer or whatever it was. We just didn't need to call an IT guy because he had me there. So I served dual purpose. So the guys loved me there. But the funny thing was I had this ability to pre-qualify a loan in my head I'd stared at the rate sheets so much and so often that I just began to understand them. So somebody would ask, would say, "Hey, Bryan, dude, what do you think I should quote this guy for this loan?" And I'd ask him certain questions, and I'd tell him right off the top, and they'd pull out the rate sheet and they go, "Yeah, you nailed it." But I was able to do this stuff off the top of my head. So I was really, really good at selling mortgages. And then I left that company, went with another company, and I met this guy named David Oswald, and he's the guy that really sharpened my sales skill. And I give him a lot of credit. He's a real estate investor. And then he left. And I'll tell you the story about when he left. It was really funny because he challenged the boss. He said, he wanted to do things. I think there was a battle between him and the big boss, and he wanted to do things his way, and the big boss wanted to do his things that way. And he said, "If I outsell your entire staff, you have to let me go." So lo and behold, David outsold, I want to say, at least 10 of us, at least 10 of us. And, he was just like, and during this period, like, we didn't understand what was going on. We didn't find out till after the fact. But during this period, he was supposed to be our sales manager, and he wasn't acting as a sales manager. He's just in his office, just always on the phone, and he'd come out angry and yelling, and he'd go back in the office and you hear him yelling at customers and just all this stuff. And then we just see him. We used to keep our score on the board. Every time you had a loan that was about to be processed, you put their name on the board, and his name just took over like 2 columns. He was a real big workhorse. And lo and behold, he outsold all of us. Still a good friend of mine to this day. Then after that, I moved on to becoming a branch manager of my own. From the first company I worked with, there was a guy there, and this is something huge. He was in a church, so he had connections, out the butt, so many connections. So he had so many connections, he was able to open his own mortgage company. So he got in contact with me. He said, "Hey, I remember you from our old company. Would you like to come here and run this company for me?" So I want to say I'm maybe like 23, 24 at this time. So I'm branch manager and I'm running this company. This guy actually didn't know a thing about mortgages. He just had a really large network. Even when he worked at the other company together, he always came to me, "Hey, pre-qual this loan, tell me how to sell it. Pre-qual this loan, tell me how to sell it." And I would do it. So, I became his eyes and ears over at the new company. And then the mortgage crisis hit, right? This was, I want to say like 2008 now or something like that. And the mortgage crisis hits, and then everything just turns to crap. It was actually probably before that. I remember I was calling to get a loan pre-qualified, and one of the companies was Delta, and I spoke to Lee Duncan. I'll never forget this. Lee Duncan had this real deep voice. And I said, "Lee, I'm looking to pre-qual loan." And he says, "It's over." And I'm like, "What?" He said, "It's over." And then he hung up the phone. I didn't understand what he meant. So I called like 10 other banks or whatever it was. And everybody's saying the same thing. "It's over. It's over. It's over." And what I didn't realize was the market had crashed and you could no longer sell loans anymore because all the banks were going out of business and everybody was folding. So now here I am back to zero, but I had, all these skills. Now keep in mind, I had a record label. My artist was incarcerated, but that didn't really matter because my artists were really stubborn, everybody there's a lot of egos in my crew. So everybody wanted to do their own thing and nobody really listened. So I was back at, as Rollo Tomasi would say, I was zeroed out. Didn't know what to do. Moved in with some other friends. My parents moved out of state. So here I am. I was on my own now. And I get a call from one of my friends who was a friend of my artist. And he said, "Hey, I'm going to Florida to shoot this music video. You want to come?" And I'm like, "Bro, I don't even have any money. I blew all my money from the mortgages just partying. I thought it would last forever." Very naive of me. So I'm like, he's like, "Nah, you don't worry about it. I got you covered. Just bring a little bit of money for food." So we go down and we go to Orlando to shoot this music video. And we drove, right? So this is like a whole entire day drive. It was probably 24 hours there and 24 hours way back, if not more. And we shoot this music video, so we had a chance to like really bond and understand each other. And on the way back, he was like, yo, bro, like I have some of the same frustrations as you, where, like these artists just aren't listening. They want to do their own thing, but they don't understand the business side of things like you and I do. So he said, hey, do you want to become a group? I'm like, sure, I got nothing else better to do. Let's become a rap group. So we become a rap group. And our first show, I completely bombed. I forgot my lyrics. It was terrible. I had stage fright. I had camera fright. I just wasn't used to being in front of crowds. I remember one time I was at my grandma's church, and we had to do the Martin Luther King speech. I have a dream. And before I could even say I have a dream, I broke down crying. I was probably like 12 at the time, and I broke down crying. I barely made it through the whole speech. So you're talking about somebody who had serious stage fright. At the age of 17, I had in chemistry class, we had to do a creative project, and my friend decided, hey, we're going to do this rap. And in the middle of the rap, I break down crying from stage fright in the middle of my class senior year. How embarrassing is that? So, just, to show you, I had serious stage fright. So fast forward, I kind of get good at this rapping thing. We actually make some pretty good songs. And we're good at business, right? So we ended up landing like 3 tours. One of them we created, which was TGI Fridays. We called the corporate office and we got authorization to go around and set up tours. And basically what we did was we bought this like stand-up banner. We threw the TGI logos banner on there. So we'd walk into different locations, pop open a banner and say, and then bring the letter from corporate and say, hey, we were authorized to be here. So the managers go, okay, sure. So we perform at TGI Fridays. We landed a monster truck tour, and then we landed a import car tour, like Hondas, Civics, all like souped up and everything like that. So then we landed on that tour, and that was a really big tour. That was a national tour. A crowd could be anywhere from 1,200 to 5,000 or something like that. And then so we fly to Miami this time, and stage fright, right? Like I'm having this stage fright, and I'll never forget this, but I'm standing backstage and I'm nervous and I'm like shaking like like an old woman with Parkinson's, just shaking. And the dude that's on stage comes to the back and he's like, yo, hand me those shirts. And I guess he had like some shirts giveaway. So I grab a couple of shirts and I throw them to him. And then again, this is where my intuition kicks in, and my intuition is like, yo, just run on stage, bro. Just run on stage, kind of like help get the nerves out. So I grab a couple of shirts, I run on stage and I do the Hulk Hogan thing. The crowd goes crazy and I throw it out there. And boom, I'm like, okay, I'm calm. Like, this is cool. The crowd didn't curse me out. Nobody said boo or anything. So we performed. Had a great show, like one of the best shows. Fast forward, we had tons of great shows on this tour. I don't have stage fright anymore. It's super exciting. And I'm the complete opposite now, where I go from a guy with stage fright to a guy who can completely control the crowd. They call it crowd control. At the same time, while we're doing this, my friend Demick said, hey, you should, try out blogging, So I'm like, all right, cool. Let me try out this thing, blogging. So I'm blogging. I'm working at a restaurant, and I'm a touring artist. I have my daughter and my twin boys on the way, and I'm still flat broke, right? In fact, when I went to go work at the restaurant, I couldn't even afford a haircut. So I looked crazy walking in there. So, so we do that. The funny thing is I remember I got this one job at Bonefish, and at Bonefish, they were like really strict. You had to put your time in, say, hey, I need this time off. So, and they said, if you don't get the time off, you still have to show up to work. So we had a show down in Virginia. So actually, I think it was Charleston, South Carolina, or Charlotte. So I put my time in and I don't get it. Well, do you think I'm going to go to work or I'm going to go tour? I went to go tour. When I go tour, I'm down there, I go to call out, and they're like, you're fired. I'm like, oh, screw it. So I'm fired, but I'm on tour. And I'm like, screw it. So then I had to go get another restaurant job and so on and so forth. Meanwhile, fast forward, Nicki Minaj went on Good Morning America. At this time, my blog went from just me pushing it for about 2 years by myself to we had about 7 writers. I gained so much traction that people actually wanted to come work for me for free. So we had 7 writers at our peak. And Nicki Minaj goes on Good Morning America and her boob pops out. And I'm like, wait, was that her boob? So I named the title Nicki Minaj Nip Slip. Posted it. Well, apparently I'm the only one who watched the video before posting it because everybody just put as the headline, Nicki Minaj on Good Morning America. Well, my server crashed. That's how many hits we got. So I had to call a friend who was signed to a record label who had just got signed to a record label. I think it was like a deal worth $500,000. And I asked him to borrow $500 so I can get a semi-dedicated server. And I purchased a server and get things back online within a few hours. And my blog is this big success, right? It's been successful somewhat, but that was like the big spike that kind of put me on the radar for a lot of people. While I'm there and I'm media now, I'm getting invited to all these different events. So one thing I was invited to was a launch for a 50 Cent product, energy drink. It's a bus launch. So I'm like, yeah, I'll come. You know, I love 50 Cent. I'm a big fan of his. And it's because I actually wrote an article on the launch of this energy drink. So they invited me out. I get on this bus and I'm sitting on this bus, and keep in mind, I'm still broke. I took, all the advertising of my business. I put it towards advertising our music because we were a band or whatever. And I'm sitting on the bus and everything's cool. Then the bus pulls off and I look to my right and I see just people standing there. And I'm just like, we're stopped at the stoplight. And I'm just looking like they're just standing there. And something was like, stand up and say you're on a bus with 50 Cent. I'm like, nah, you can't do that. Right? 2 voices in my head are talking to each other. No, you can't do that. You can't do that. Yes, you can. No, you can't. So eventually I'm just like, defeat fear. And I just stand up. I'm like, yeah, I'm on a bus with 50 Cent. And a whole bunch of people just rush over to the bus. So 50 Cent stands up. They're throwing energy shots across all over the side of the bus, blah, 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 blah. Then the bus pulls off. And 50 Cent's team pulls me to the front of the bus. Keep in mind, when I got on the bus, they made me change my seat to the back because I couldn't be near 50. Now I'm near 50. They throw the hat on me and they throw the shirt on me. Fast forward, they invite me out to Chicago to host a show for them. And then I become regional marketing director for an incubator, a startup. And what they did was they paired brands with investors / influencers. We'd had meetings with Asher Roth, Justin Bieber, Kanye West. And obviously 50 was one of our partners. So that was like my first real big break, so to speak. 2 years later, I'm just like, tired of doing this, burnt out. It was startup life. I'd come into work at 8 a.m. My commute was 2 hours via train. And then I'd be out till 3 a.m. in the morning because I had 2 roles. I was regional marketing director and I was nightlife manager. So, I had to do nightlife execution. So I'd leave the New York City at 3 a.m., get home at 6, shower, then come back to the office. Some days I slept in the office. I was super burnt out after about 2 years. And then we part ways. So I decided to go into business for myself and just decided to be a consultant because technically I was a consultant with that company. I was never actually an employee. So I'm talking to a lot of people who are creating products and brands. And I'm just like, why don't you get into the mobile app space? Like the mobile app space is growing. And people are like, oh, I'm I'm just like, why aren't people getting into this space? I'm like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to get into this space. So I go apply for this job. I think it was called Inbox, and it's basically a text message app. And I go to apply for this job. Now, keep in mind, anytime I've interviewed in the past, I've gotten a job. I've never been turned down for a job because I interview really well and I'm really intelligent. Well, lo and behold, these people were like, dude, you're not a good fit. I'm just like, what? But I understood why, because during the interview, this guy's asking me these questions. And I'm just like, I had never heard of these terms like UTM, ASO, so on and so forth. So I'm like, what is he talking about? So I go home and I'm kind of like distraught, like, damn, I thought I was going to get that job. I really wanted that job. It was a really cool place. This is, cool tech. It's a mobile app. This is the space I want to be in. But I didn't know anything. So I had to spend the next year studying digital marketing. So I bought courses. I downloaded all the free ebooks. I YouTubed. I went on inbound.org, growthhackers.com. And I just studied every single blog in and out. And then I started applying again, or I was a consultant, so I was a sole proprietorship. So I'm getting contracts now from mobile app companies, and they're asking me to do marketing for them. And, I found myself back at the same place where I was with the record label, where, I'm the expert here and people weren't trusting my expertise. So I'm just like, what the heck is going on? Like, why aren't people trusting what I'm saying? It seems like every time I'm like, hey, we should do this, there's like a ton of pushback. And it's just some dude who doesn't even understand digital marketing, let alone digital marketing. And I understood traditional marketing. And now, because I studied and practiced, I understood digital marketing. So 20 mobile apps later, I keep in mind, I worked for also a digital ASO agency, App Store Optimization Agency. So I worked for a bunch of ad companies there, running Facebook ads and App Store ads and doing SEO work and all types of contract type work. So I got to see a whole lot of different projects. I got to see projects that were launching. I got to see projects that were already in the millions of revenue. I was spending some campaigns $2,500 a day, others, maybe $25K. Right? It's like really crazy. So I got to see a lot. We even did some $10 campaigns, just to test and see what worked before we bumped up the spend. But again, frustration sets in, and I'm just like, something's not clicking here. Something's just not right. So I venture off into my own thing and launch my own consulting firm again, but this time with the intention of taking equity. It's like, if I'm going to work with these companies, I can't just do this for salary. I need equity. So I go ahead and I see this guy online, and it's the same guy from Inbox who I didn't get the interview with. Get the job with after I interviewed. And lo and behold, we meet up, talk, and he likes me now. And we end up becoming business partners, a good friend now. And that's a company I'm a part of, which is coinbitsapp.com. So it kind of goes to show you that you can go from, being turned down to that same person becoming a co-founder with, if you just kind of just throw some of those hurdles over your shoulder and just put your head down and just study and just kind of put the blame on yourself. And that's exactly what I did. I just made sure I studied and blame myself. And then now I'm with Wazo AI and Jiffitize. I have another AI company I'm in talks with now. My cousin launched another company, so I'm going to help him launch that. So I'm just, at this point, I'm just trying to fill my portfolio with as many companies as possible, because as we know, 99% of businesses are going to fail. So you gotta, don't put your eggs in all one basket, so to speak, right? As they always say. So, I'm diversifying my portfolio and trying to be involved with as many companies as possible, but still give them the attention they deserve based upon my equity. Over at Wazo, I'm the COO. At CoinBitsApp, there's not really a CEO. We kind of share the CEO role. Jiffitize, I'm the CEO / co-founder. Just really fun projects. But I think, the main takeaway is the fact that you can be down, but if you decide to take responsibility for yourself, you can be up again, right? So so after the Coinbits app thing, I'm doing my controversial social political commentary on Twitter, and I do the Starbucks stunt that goes viral. I get on Fox News, and then things kind of die down. And then somebody suggests for me to go on Joe Rogan. So I go on a Joe Rogan experience, and I have a killer experience there. And then that completely transforms my life, right? Because it's Joe Rogan, the #1 podcast in the world. And that kind of puts you on another plateau and puts you in a different place in people's minds. And, that's kind of like what brings me to the guy I am today. Shout out to Joe Rogan, appreciate him having me on. But, these milestones going from, stage fright to 50 Cent to Laura Ingraham to Joe Rogan, all these milestones are building up. And I'm just looking forward to seeing what the next milestone is. Hopefully it's a successful exit. That's the big one I'm looking for now. Did I take up that 30 minutes? Was that good?
That was really good. That was really good. Listen, Bryan, thank you so much for giving us that insight. What a journey. Really love hearing stories like that. You see people just coming up and coming through and finding their feet, which is exactly what has clearly happened in your case. We've got some questions. I said we'd have a bit of a Q&A at the end, so it'd be great if you could answer some of those. We have some of these sent in prior, or kind of run just to see, what would people like to ask Bryan Sharpe after this particular session. So I'm just gonna go straight and shoot these out. What would you say has been your greatest personal accomplishment?
Getting on the Joe Rogan experience, and prior to, I had no idea how big that would be for me. I have these blinders on, and I'm so focused on what I do. Sometimes I'm not aware of what's happening in the outside world. But so when he invites me on, I'm like, yeah, sure, sounds like fun. And I posted the conversation I had, and everybody's like, you're so cavalier. Do you even realize what you're about to do? And I'm like, no, I have no idea what I'm about to do. Right. But I look on his channel, and like all his stuff gets like 1 million hits or better. So I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. This is going to be great exposure. So afterwards, I see like, Fox News probably gave me like 20,000 followers, but this gave me like 50,000 followers. Right. So I was just like, well, or 30,000, something like that. But I started to see the impact, people reaching out to me, a lot of emails. Yeah. So that was definitely, it was bigger than the 50 Cent thing, but the 50 Cent thing was the one thing that kind of gave me the confidence that said, hey, I know what I'm doing here.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah.
That's amazing. What would you say has been the biggest sacrifice that you've had to make to get you to where you're at now?
Oh man, so there's plenty. I had to miss my son's I have twin boys. I had to miss their first birthday party to go tour. My girl at the time didn't understand it. It's a moment I would never take back. And I was the same, I forget which show that was actually. I was going to say it was the other one, but yeah, so that was a big one. Being broke and trusting in the movement, right? Trusting in the focus. So I have this blog, and the blog's not generating revenue because I refused to advertise on it. And I just wanted all the advertising to go to our music, but just trusting that, waking up at, or monitoring the music space and getting out of my bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, and, that quitting jobs, right. Or getting fired from jobs, because I was giving preference to my own hustles, to my own entrepreneurship, right? Like putting that ahead of the wage earning, ahead of the salary gigs was a huge, huge sacrifice. But I had to go many years without substantial income, just kind of like hustling and getting by, making rent month to month. and I could have gotten a job. I could have gotten really good jobs. And it's just like, nah, like I knew I had to build my own thing. And if I didn't, I'd always be chasing a job, you know? Yeah, you know, just being broke and trusting in the movement, trusting in the vibe.
I hear that. I hear that. So, what I mean, based on that, what would you say overall was the most, to take the Joe Rogan situation out for a second? What would you say is probably the most successful decision that you've ever made, separate from that Joe Rogan, the decision to be on that Joe Rogan podcast?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the intuition, right? So the intuition to hop up on that bus with 50 Cent and defeating fear, right? Mm-hmm. That completely changes my life. The decision to, because my girl, you know, usually she's like, I'm going to the mall, and I'm like, nah, I'm staying home. Mm-hmm. But that decision to listen to her that day and fine, I'll come and go to the mall and do the Starbucks stunt, because we're walking and then we stop right by Starbucks to have a seat. And I'm like, oh, wait, this was on the news recently. And I had this stunt in my head. So again, defeating fear, saying, screw it, let's do this, was a huge milestone. And then the Joe Rogan thing kind of happened off of intuition too, because my followers were asking me to, you know, to go on there. And the discussion was hot. And then a few weeks later, like nothing. And I was just, and I tweeted it again. And then that's when he responded. I guess one of my followers was important enough and close enough to Joe Rogan that they, you know, I know you didn't want the Joe Rogan thing, but it is really the intuition that plays a role in a lot of my success, and just going along with it and defeating fear. And then also, you know, when I didn't get the job at Inbox and studying for a year, right? And, you know, I remember one time I bought a Neil Patel course. I think that thing was going for like $1,500, and, you know, dropping $1,500 on that course. And, I mean, at that time, I knew what was in the course. Like, they tells you what's in the course. At that time, I probably knew at least 75% of the stuff. I was just so hungry for, I think, one module. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, I didn't even finish that course, but I found one piece of information from that course. And it was Gary Halbert's book, The Boron Letters. And I'm telling you, $1,500 I spent just to find the name of that book. It just completely transformed my life, right? Because that's when I started getting into copywriting, and copywriting completely changed the way I tweet, completely changed the way I write copy, completely changed the way I write emails too.
That's amazing. So, I mean, I guess following on from that pretty well, when did you kind of first realize that social media could pay the bills?
Yeah. So back in 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, there was this thing called Black Planet. And I had this page called Too Hot for BP. And basically, I was doing native advertising before native advertising was called that. And I basically just aggregated all the hot girls or whoever I deemed to be hot on this page. But then I used macro media. It was like a version of it was kind of like Photoshop. It was a Photoshop competitor at the time. And I was creating banners for my friends. It was like 3 of us. So I created a banner. So it'd be hot girl, hot girl, hot girl, then his banner, the link to his page, then mine, so forth. So I always had like this advertising in mind. And then we moved over to MySpace, and MySpace was really huge. And we were able to actually geo-target on MySpace organically. But we had a team. I was a photographer at that time. And we had a team, and we were very cohesive. So we had a graphic designer, I was a photographer, and then my homie was connected to all these celebrities. So combine all those things, we had really great content. So we were also cohesive. So everybody in our crew would have the same profile pic, you know, of whatever our latest project was, whatever content we created it was. So when we took over, like they had a message board back then. So we take over the message board, so on and so forth. And I remember getting a call from somebody like, yo, did you guys hack MySpace? And I'm like, no, why? He's like, yo, everywhere I look, I see your stuff. Right. So I was actually at that time in MySpace, I was monetizing MySpace and getting gigs for the photography work. And, you know, my friend had the connections to the celebrities through a friend. And, you know, I had Trish, who was doing all of my graphic design work. And I mean, she had some awesome graphic design work. So I kind of knew early on that, you know, early 2000s that there also, you know, you got to remember, I built my first website in, you know, 96, 98, somewhere around there. And my first e-com client probably came in 99. So I had my first e-com client in 99. I built the store. He had like these antique coins, collector's coins. So I built a website so he could sell them. So I was already doing that stuff. Yeah.
So you already started to have an understanding for it just at that stage, anyway, in the early stage. Moving to the more tech side of things, because obviously it'd be good actually to get give us a high level overview of the two or three tech projects that you are CEO of. So that would be great for everyone that's watching that doesn't actually know what those particular products are. Also, it'd be really interesting to get an understanding from your point of view of you know, what have been the biggest obstacles you've had to deal with when navigating the whole tech ecosystem. So yeah, first, if you could just give us a quick kind of your own pitch as to the projects that you're involved with, that would be great.
Yeah, so I find that founders are stupid. You know, being a consultant for over 20 companies, I found that they all had the same flaw. They thought they knew everything. You know, so the biggest flaw I find with founders is they don't understand software, and they don't understand batch processing. If you're not batch processing, you're not going to meet deadlines. And also, especially when dealing with iPhone apps, you know, if you're not updating your app and pushing a new version once a week, at the maximum once every 2 weeks, then you're not really, you know, you're not really making any waves. You know, software requires consistent iteration. Also, it helps with your ASO to always be pushing new versions of your app, but always making these small tweaks is something that a lot of founders, they want to take like these big, large updates and like, oh, let's put everything. And then it's just like, then they push it and it's like bugs all throughout, right? So now you're back at square one. I remember one time I was working with a founder and I said to this guy, I said, we run like ads like $2,500 a day. It was a game company. And I said to him, I said, hey, your purchase conversions is broken. It's not connected on the Facebook ads. And he was like, why does that matter? I'm like, well, Facebook doesn't know if this is an actual purchase or not. And this is important for creating your lookalike audience. And he's like, just run the ads. And I'm like, all right, cool. So I run the ads and he's like, why aren't things performing? So I said it before. I'm like, well, let me put it in writing this time, right? So I put it in writing. I say, hey, purchase conversions aren't connected. We need to do this now before we run ads again. So the tech guy was working on a new version of the app. He's like, I don't have time for this. I'll just push it in the next update, and they'll go push the next update. And I'm just like, okay. So Dave comes back and he's like, yo, run the ads. And I'm like, Dave, we need the purchase conversions. He's like, just run the ads. So I run the ads. And every day he's just barking on me. Why isn't it working? Why isn't it working? So I type up another email. Like, we need to have the purchase conversions, right? So the app finally is done. The next version of the app's finally done. Purchase conversions are in there. And they push it out, right? So I know what's about to happen, right? Because I'm running the ads. So I'm watching at home on the Facebook ads mobile app. And then, boom, what happens? A huge spike in purchases goes out, right? So I come to work the next day. We're in the New York startup WeWork space. And he's like, Bryan, what happened? And I'm like, the purchase conversions went in. He's like, no, that can't be it. I'm like, oh my God. So he's like, find out what it is and tell me what it is. So I pretend to do some work. And then I come back. I'm like, it's the purchase conversions thing. And he's like, are you sure? Yes. Well, because things are working now, they decided they didn't need me anymore. So they let me go. Right. So this is something that told me, like, that was the last job I ever worked, but I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. This is why I just said, look, I'm just going to go and figure out how to make money myself. And that's why I'm making money on social media and so forth. And I do consulting every once in a while from there. And I have my class on Saturdays. But Wazo AI is a camera vision company. Anything that a camera can see, we can analyze. We do telemetry. We do facial recognition, fall detection, weapon detection. And right now we have one client where we're doing COVID compliance.
Okay.
So basically people counting.
Okay.
To make sure that they never breach a certain capacity, so that people are practicing social distancing. This is a grocery store out in Ohio. So this is a really fun project for me. Really young team. And the fact that we're based in Akron, Ohio, means we have super low overhead, right?
Sure.
So that's really cool. Jiffitize is the first company I ever got equity in. I was talking to this girl and she wanted to hire me. And I said, look, I don't want your cash. I got plenty of cash. I want equity. Make me a partner and, I'll work with you. So shout out to Simone. So Jiffitize is basically a very simple tool, connects to Twitter and basically allows you to rip videos and GIFs from the Twitter platform and save it to your iPhone. Otherwise, it's just not possible. You got to do some other kind of like hacky things. And then, the story of Coinbits app I told, where I didn't get the job at Inbox, so forth. And here we are today with Maher. So Maher and Yusuf started this company and I'm a partner in that company. And, right now, I have to talk to our attorney. We're trying to get the license to allow people to withdraw their Bitcoin to a wallet. Currently, it's custodial. And I know if you don't own your keys, you don't own the coins, right? Yeah, but, I have a lot of people. We have a great user base. People reach out to me all the time, say, hey, I've been using this for years. Had no idea this was your company. So yeah, that's a really exciting project for me too. So we're looking to get investment in that because it's very expensive to be in that space.
Of course, very competitive.
Yeah.
Amazing. And what would you say you want your legacy to be?
Yeah, I want my legacy to be whatever my kids become. Right. I want people to know that. Wow, this guy created really successful, really intelligent children. I love my kids to death. They're super intelligent, super smart, super ambitious, just really mature kids. People say, oh my God, like one time I was at a function and people were like, how'd you get your kids to drink water? And I'm like, that's the only thing available in my house is water. So that's what they're accustomed to drinking, And then people say, oh, your kids are so well-behaved. How do you, create such well-behaved kids? I'm like, because I don't treat them like kids. I treat them like adults. I talk to them. I give them respect and they give me respect. I understand children very well and I understand how to discipline them without being the yelling parent all the time. I think sometimes you have to. But the legacy is just somebody who was transparent, honest, put humanity first and, never bowed to mainstream, never bowed to the crowd, always trusted in himself and, always went my own way. I believe in myself. I trust in my ability and I want people to know that I was brave.
Man, I love that. And look, finally, 2 questions. How important has your understanding of internet culture been to your career? Would you say it's supremely important?
Yeah. Like I said, I've been around since the AOL chat rooms where, we would troll the chat room. So, people were wondering like why I'm so good on Twitter. I'm like, man, we used to troll chat rooms on AOL when I was 16, I'm not new to the space at all. When I was, so somebody says, people say, oh, social media is so draining. I'm like, I've never used social media for anything other than business. I think if it wasn't for business, I don't think I'd be on social media. I don't think I'd use it for entertainment. And sometimes when people use it for entertainment, I look at them like, really? Like you get a kick out of this? Sometimes it can be entertaining, but for the most part, if I couldn't use it to increase my profile or increase the profile of my business, I probably wouldn't be on it. But the culture is something I'm very aware of and very accustomed to and understand completely. I love it. I do love aspects of it. I think it's getting toxic on Twitter now, but there are ways to mitigate that, block people. mute your tweet, and so on and so forth. But it's also an opportunity to like curate your audience, right? So, aside from growing, sometimes my followers will say to me, they said, hey, if Hotep Jesus didn't do the things he did, he'd probably be at like 200,000 followers or 1,000,000 followers, but you got to respect him because he definitely wants to curate his audience. Mm-hmm. So I've got this like really cult-like following, which is why I wrote the book, Twitter Marketing, How to Build a Cult-like Following, digital versions called Dominate Twitter. So yeah, I dominate the space.
Not being modest or anything, right? So, I mean, look, finally, and it's good that we come on to that, because finally, I think that the last question I'm going to ask you is going to be about that whole Twitter space and how toxic it's kind of become recently. And you can go political if you want. This is the time to do it now. How does Bryan Sharpe maintain the two sides to him, his personality, the CEO entrepreneur side of it, and the socio-political commentating side of it? How do you maintain those two, that balance?
Yeah. So some people view them as two people. My girl even says you got a split personality, and my rebuttal to that is, nah, I'm just dynamic. I can switch modes so fast, and I can pivot from one thing to the next so fast. But I see the two as being one. We see that with tech today. Tech is getting involved in politics, but technology is the backbone of evolution, at least for humans. So if you're not involved in tech, you're not affecting the world. And that's really the driving force for me, is to, how do we affect the world? How do we change the world for the better? How do we give people access to more resources and more knowledge? But for a while I was scared the social political commentary would hinder my upward mobility in the tech space. And then I started looking at the numbers, and I'm like, well, there's 400 million people in America. If 1 million hate me, there's still 399 million to go. So
that's a good way.
Yeah. So a
brave way of looking at it.
Thanks. Yeah. Same thing with Twitter too. I'm like, there's X amount of Twitter followers. I actually looked it up at the time, and it's like, there's X amount of Twitter followers. Again, if 500,000 hate me, there's still, X million still out there. Right. And also, I once you understand business very well, you start to understand that you don't exactly need the higher ups to give you access. I think there's a lot of good people in many different spaces that when they see you and they see you're genuine, they'll give you access to certain spaces. So I know a lot of spaces are liberal controlled and whatnot. And, I might not get access to those spaces. But again, I went with the number odds, and I'm like, well, okay, yeah, maybe it's dominated by, liberals, and, they might not like me and they might blackball me. But out of those numbers, it's got to be somebody who's right-leaning, right? Or somebody who's closer to what I believe in the I space, and they have to exist. And so I just, said, screw the fear again, right? And just be you, like, say how you feel. I'm not going to allow somebody to just silence me. So, if fast forward, I don't want to put any names out there, but there's a lot of people in the tech space, important people too, who follow me and say, hey, yo, keep going. We love it. And they can't speak up, but I can. So they look at me as being, that voice for them and shaking things up. And, my goal is that one day, I shake things up so well that they can have a voice. They can speak up and say how they feel without fear of ostracization, without fear of losing income, without being lambasted by their associates and their cohort, which is, I think, what they're really afraid of, is their friends saying, hey, you're a racist, right? And it's like, no, he's not a racist. He has a valid opinion about things. Like, we don't have to look at things just one way, but the balancing act is I'm a Libra, right? So in our sign, we balance, and And I've always been a type of guy who just tries to find balance in things. And I think that's why I'm such an objective thinker. Like, I'm able to look at both sides. So people are like, you contradict yourself. And I'm like, yeah, I contradict myself because I can see both sides of a thing, you know? So it's just my natural talent to be able to create balance in things. It's just easy for me.
Amazing.
Comes natural.
Great. What a great answer. Well, look, we're going to wrap it up here. I can't thank you enough for doing this. It's been great. And I hope that everyone that's managed to tune in and will watch this on playback will have got a really interesting insight into you, because I think a lot of what you've shared today, probably many people don't know. It's a story that they don't see when they see your online presence. So I think this is going to be a great insight into that. And personally, you know, to get a bit of time with you to ask some of these questions and get some of these answers has been quite a privilege. So thank you again, Bryan. Really appreciate it. Hopefully you'll stick around for the rest of the afternoon. I know it's quite early for you over there. We've got you out, but we've got some interesting stuff coming up this afternoon. Some of the remaining Bashford startups are going to pitch as well. So it'll be good to see you in that session.
Thank you. Appreciate you, man. I'll definitely check some of these stuff out.
Thanks, Bryan. Thank you.